Well, thank you for that wonderful and very gracious introduction, Mary Lou and Elysia. We appreciate it. Every time I hear them talk about the Neighbors Naturescaping program and what Brightside offers, it always amazes me because they've been providing great resources for such a long period of time. 25 years makes me feel older than I already am, because I think I have known Mary Lou for much of that time, but we won't talk about exactly how long, right? Because that just dates us. But it's a pleasure to be here. I'm Mark Grueber, Community Forester with the Missouri Department of Conservation. I've been working with Brightside for a very, very long time. Actually kind of started my career working for the City of St. Louis Forestry Division and worked with Brightside a lot when I worked there. So it's been a lot of years of doing that. I've been in community forestry for about 34 years now. So quite a long period of time working for a couple different entities. And alongside me today,
I'm Danny Moncheski. Hello, good morning. I now realize I've been a part of this for 5 years, so that's pretty cool because time flies. I still think I'm kind of new to the job, but I've been here 5 years, so that's kind of cool. I'm also a community forester. I've been able to work in private industry at a large-scale tree care company, worked for a utility company. I've worked on my own consulting with landowners in regards to trees and forestry-related work. And now I've been at the department, as I said, for 5 years, serving in the same capacity as Mark, helping you in your communities deal with your trees that are in public and public-owned spaces and treating them as a forest and helping to manage those trees and take care of them and grow them, and also help provide native habitat, much like you see all around us here, that is native grasses, shrubs, forbs, and trees. So not just trees, we do other things too.
Absolutely. And for those of you that maybe have never heard that term forbs before, that's the pretty flowers that you see in behind us and next to our little Ozark stream that we have flowing through here. One more thing I just wanted to say before we really get started is, boy, I really hope you're sitting outside when you're watching this, because we don't get too many days like this. So hopefully you're outside enjoying this beautiful weather, or please, after you're done, if you don't have that opportunity.
Yeah, wait till we're done.
Get outside sometime today, will you? And enjoy. I know we're going to go enjoy ourselves after this, so please do the same thing.
What we're going to cover here in the next, hour-ish, we're kind of at your disposal here for a period of time. So as we're going over our information, which is a lot, because typically on a normal Slugs event, we would have multiple class sessions going in more detail, but we're going to give an overview of a lot of the necessary information to keep your plants and your project, get them established and keep them thriving. So if you have any questions along the way, please feel free to type anything you may not quite understand, or you want another more in-depth assessment of it, just shoot us a question. So with that, we'll kind of get started, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. So really the overarching concept we're going to talk about here today is something that's commonly in our industry anyway called plant health care. And that sounds like kind of a nebulous term, like, well, why wouldn't you take care of plants? It's really a philosophy, and the idea is with plant health care is that you're starting at the very beginning, which is when you go to purchase the plant or get the plant for your project, pick it up here at Brightside, or purchase a plant from a nursery or garden center or your favorite big box hardware store. It starts at that point and it continues on for the lifespan of that plant and really your garden. It's a holistic, large-scale way to manage a garden. And I think one of the things that can be intimidating for folks taking on a project like this, or even just working out in their yard, is you look at what's behind you here and they think, well, magic happened to create all this, or they've got access to professionals who designed that, and in some cases that's true, but I promise you this is not that difficult. It just takes planning and, quite honestly, some hard work. And I heard Mary Lou talking about don't try to take on a project like this on your own, and I think about that You know, when I'm tending my own garden, if it's just me out there doing some weeding or some management, it's like, oh man, but it sure would be nice to have somebody else working alongside you. So especially if you're going to take on a neighborhood project, don't try to do it yourself. Have a good core of folks that you know you can rely on that are there to help you, and it's going to make things a whole heck of a lot easier, and make this idea of caring and maintaining your garden and this plant health care philosophy a whole heck of a lot easier.
Absolutely, absolutely. And as Mark was saying, it kind of starts at the very beginning, this idea of plant health care. It's not, let's get our plant material and stick it on our site because this is the site we have and we think this will work with that. And you start at the very beginning, and as being a part of this program, you have tools at your disposal as far as planting materials to start to get an idea of a layout, one, where you might want plants on your space, but also what type of soil and what type of plants you are interested in. And will the two grow together? We call that like right plant, right place. So in your garden area or open space, you have to first find out what types of plants grow in this climate or this weather, the weather that we have every year in St. Louis or in this region. So can those plants that you're interested in because of the color, the size, and their growth habit, you may like them for how they look, but will they survive in the heat, in drought, in cool, wet springs like we've had this year? Will they survive the harsh freezes of the winter in St. Louis? So those are the things that you want to start with. There are places like the Missouri Botanical Garden. They have a website that's you have a plant picker, and you can choose different characteristics of plants, and it'll tell you what types of soil they grow and how suitable they are to our area. There's also another website called grownative.org that has a similar plant choosing option. So that's one aspect of it. You don't want to plant a large oak tree in the center of an open lot because you think that could be a good focal point and provide shade if there's overhead utilities. In the same notion, you don't want to plant something that would spread and colonize a whole area if sides of that area are outside of your property line, because then you'd have issues of maintenance going forward, of having to put extra work. We said it's hard work. You don't want to make extra work for yourself. So those are some of the ideas behind this right tree, right place, if there's anything you wanted to...
Yeah, I just go into a little bit more depth on that with one of the things that I always encourage people to do is look at their site conditions first and really analyze that. Because if you don't really understand what you're getting yourself into as far as how much sunlight, and go out there at various times during the day and look at what part of your yard or your garden is shady and look at what part is in sun. So you can think about, well, we can do some sun-loving plants here. We can do some partial shade plants here. Boy, this always appears to be in the shade, which is like my own garden at home. You're going to need shade plants. And the more you try to push those boundaries, push those limitations, the more maintenance you're going to have to provide, the more work that you're going to have to put into it to make sure that plant thrives. And one of the things that I always have concerns about is I hear a lot of gardeners will talk about a particular plant and say, well, that just doesn't grow here. And you look around and you can see it in 57 different places. Well, okay, it's not the plant that's the problem, it's you. and by that I'm talking about myself too. We have certain things that we like. We like a certain aesthetic. We like certain plants. A lot of people have an affinity for roses. Well, that's great. Roses are super high maintenance plants, and they're not native. Mostly, there's a couple kinds, but the ones that you're going to buy in the store are not native to the state of Missouri. Meaning that, as Danny mentioned, you're probably going to have issues with climate at some point, weather extremes, and you're probably going to have issue with soil in certain sites. So, don't dismiss stuff without making sure you've done a good amount of analysis first.
Yeah.
Dig some test holes. Go out there with the shovel at your. Make sure you have some permission to access the lot if you're going on a public lot.
And you've also contacted the dig right for marking utilities before putting a shovel into the ground. That's important too.
Correct. Yes, absolutely. We want everybody to be safe out there. But dig a little test hole, fill it up with water, see how fast it drains. A lot of the lots that you may be working on may have some buried building materials. When we talk about soils, which we'll get into some more detail later, these what we call soil in a lot of these areas where you guys are going to be working is very highly disturbed. It was probably farmed hundreds of years ago, then it was built on and torn down and built on and torn down over and over. So you're going to find things buried. The soil has been so turned up and turned over that a lot of the natural properties, when it comes to breaking things down like mulch or compost, things like that, it's not that it's not going to happen, but it's lessened, it's diminished. So what do we do to deal with that type of situation? Yes, there are some things, but soil is difficult to change or alter. So you want to make sure, again, that you're working with what you have. That's where you're going to have the most success.
Right.
And so, dig a test hole, look at it, analyze it, fill it up with water, see how fast the water drains out. Is this a wet site? Is it a dry site? Is it full sun? Is it less than full sun? As Danny mentioned, how much space do I have to work with above ground and below ground? Think about roots, how far out they're going to grow. If you're talking about trees or shrubs, especially bigger shade trees, make sure you have plenty of room. Otherwise, you're really increasing your maintenance down the road.
Yeah, absolutely. And we wanted to also here talk about with this thinking holistically with this plant healthcare and this right plant, right place. If you can choose a plant that will work for your aesthetic and for the function that would typically grow that is matched to the soil and the sunlight conditions and weather conditions, you are essentially going to have to, you'll be able to minimize your maintenance. You will always have maintenance, as Mary Lou said, but you will minimize your maintenance and minimize your costs, which is important because we're all on a budget, and especially being a part of this program, there's only so much money to be able to go around for us all to be able to do these types of projects.
And time.
And
as
time.
Well. Yeah.
So it's really important to be intelligent with our resources, and that's why choosing the right place, the right plant in the right place is so important.
Yeah, it's when we try to push the envelope, and one of the examples I always talk about is I love azaleas. They're one of my favorite plants. Well, there's only one species that's native to the state of Missouri, and by native, if you're not sure what that term means, it means really when European settlement came into an area, that plant existed here naturally. It was growing here, and nobody cultivated it. It was doing its thing on its own. So,
believe it or not, there wasn't many nurseries back then.
Yeah, there wasn't a whole lot of nurseries or garden centers back then, no. But I love azaleas, so I'm going to have one in my yard. Well, they don't particularly like the climate here, and they're not a big fan of heavier clay soils, which a lot of us have to deal with. And so it struggles, and I have to maintain it more, and I have to pay a lot of attention to it. And that's not to say that that's wrong. It's just that you need to understand that from the very beginning. You'll be a lot happier with your garden. Everybody will be. And you'll get the aesthetic you want. And if you choose to take on a few more of those challenging type of plants, that's fine. No problem with that. Just make sure you understand. And so that's why we really concentrate on Missouri natives. They provide so much for us. They're very tolerant of our climatic extremes and the soil conditions. And it's not a bad maybe moment to segue into a little bit of soils discussion. A lot of people complain about heavy clay soils, and one thing you need to realize, it's really not the clay soil that's the issue. It's the fact that we compact it so much that is the problem. So to build on a site, soils get packed down so they don't move around, and your foundations don't move and shift, and pavement cracks and things like that. That's what causes the real problem with water drainage and lack of oxygen in the soil, which is another thing we'll get into in some detail later. But clay soils actually allow for a huge diversity of plant species. It's one thing Missouri's really blessed with, is with our climate kind of halfway between north and south, and the types of soils and the variety of the soils that we have across the state. There's hundreds, if not thousands, of plant species we can actually plant in our gardens and work with, but kind of going back to what we were talking about before, you really need to understand what your site will be able to support.
Yeah.
And what it won't, because we have some really sandy soils in Missouri, and you're not going to have success with a sandy soil type of plant in a heavy clay. They're just not going to work well together.
And that's what the soil is so very important, which is why we're talking about this here, because of the amount of native species. It can seem overwhelming. You know, the words thousands of plants. It's like this giant funnel, and you don't know where to start at the top. Well, doing a little research about the soil of your site can really start to narrow that down and make something that seems daunting not so overwhelming. By looking at our soil and what Mark is talking about, what is it made up of? How does the water drain through it? Those are really important and how they affect plants. We're going to go into some detail, maybe a little bit about that. But the really important thing to take away from this is have your soil tested.
Absolutely.
Whether or not you become an expert on soil and do some more research on your own after this is up to you. But at the very least, we really, really would like you to have that soil tested. And it's very easy to do. I don't even want to go into it now, or do you want to talk more about it?
No, I think this is a good time.
Okay.
Good time.
And getting a soil test is as simple as taking a sandwich bag and a 5-gallon bucket and a shovel. And it doesn't even have to be a 5-gallon bucket, a coffee can. And whatever your site is, whatever its size, whether it is 10 feet by 10 feet or it's a whole corner lot, pick 2 or 3, maybe even more spots in there and get below the turf grass. So kind of shave that turf grass off with a shovel or hand trowel, and then dig just below that to maybe the first 12 inches. Really don't need to go that deep, but you don't want, just want to get a scoop. Put about a scoop or so from each site in that bucket, churn it around a little bit, and then just fill the sandwich bag. And then put the address, your name, and contact number on that sandwich bag, and bring it to the University of Missouri Extension. They have an office in Kirkwood.
You can also drop it off here.
And you can also drop it off at Brightside. And
oh, really? You guys are no longer doing that? Soil test?
While the coronavirus is going on,
okay.
We're not a drop-off location.
Okay.
Okay.
We're encouraging people to call the extension.
Call extension. Okay.
So,
we're getting corrected. Sorry.
Yes, thank you. So call the University of Missouri Extension office first, and they'll have an updated protocol with COVID-19. But typically they will process. I know the lab is open. It's just how you get the sample there. Mm-hmm. And what they'll do is give you a report for your site on what nutrients are available in the soil, what the physical makeup is, as Mark was talking about clay versus sand, and we can pretty much assume it's going to be all clay. Mm-hmm. But what it will also do is give you the soil pH, which is the measure of acidity in the soil, and all that information, you can go to one of these plant finders and really fine-tune what would grow on the site, and it will really help.
Yeah, and the information they have gotten in their Neighbors Naturescaping packets at the list of plants, oftentimes you'll see in the description of the plant, how tall it gets, what color flowers it has, but is tolerant of high or low pH soils, tolerates a lot of water, does not tolerate water, tolerates dry sites, and we'll talk about that more. And you've got a great example to come visit, and I think Mary Lou mentioned that as well, right behind you, where you can see plants that tolerate wet areas. We have a little swale running back to our little stream right here. These would be wet site adapted plants. You can see the rock shelf back behind me, plants up above that, very dry site plants. That's what we call our glade area, and if you're not familiar with that term, and it gets misused a lot, glades really are rocky, dry areas. You see them a lot in southern part of Missouri. There are some in and around the outskirts of St. Louis here, but very rocky, very dry, very harsh sites, especially in the summertime. They're not going to get a lot of moisture. They're going to constantly be dry, and people think, well, you can't plant anything around. Well, yeah, you can, because you can see it back behind me. You just have to make sure, again, you pick plants that are adapted to and thrive in those conditions. And it's
kind of like a vacant lot.
Kind of like a vacant lot, yeah, as Mary Lou just mentioned. Absolutely, yeah. So if you get a chance to visit here, one of the ways that we set this garden out when in the planning stages was to think about well, what types of areas would people have in their yards, and what naturally occurs in Missouri, and how can we blend those two together? Now, we all have, may not all, but you might have a wet spot in your yard. So come look at the area where this little swale and creek is, and pick plants that would do well there, or on the lot that you're going to use to plant on. Dry, rocky, very sunny south and west exposures of a building where you're going to get a lot of heat concentrated in the summertime. This is a great spot to pick and choose plants from. And you can see how tall they get. You can see how wide they get. What color are the flowers? When do they bloom? All that stuff you can take into account. It makes you such a more successful gardener. As much as you can mimic the location where that plant naturally grows, the way more successful it's going to be, you're going to be, and so much less maintenance, because the plant knows those conditions, right? It knows how to grow there. It's very adapted to those sites, and they thrive.
Yeah.
Sometimes too much. Sometimes they start to take off on their own, and you're like, well, I wanted one of these, I didn't want 57. Part of maintenance sometimes is reducing the numbers of those plants that are really doing well. So that's another part of that formula, I guess, to keep in mind.
Yeah,
a little bit.
So we've talked about putting what plant healthcare is as a whole. We've started to dig into the details of this. We've talked about the right plant in the right place, looking at our layout. We've talked about the soils. So now we're going to assume we've gone through those steps and on our site, and now we're going to talk about choosing plants and the installation of the plants. This is another big portion of plant healthcare, because if I was to just purchase some trays of small wildflowers or a shrub from a supplier, and I basically just throw the tray in a hole and walk away and throw dirt over it, or I just put that burlapped or container into the ground and walk away, I'm probably going to have to be coming back and doing a lot more work. Just guessing. But if I take the necessary steps to install those in the correct way, again, I'm going to minimize my care, and I'm going to give those plants the best chance of survival in the long term. So what you always want to do is have that site prepped in a way that you have a hole that is dug that is appropriate. Doesn't need to be the size of a manhole lid for a 1 pint small flower or grass, but it also needs to be a little larger than just really like shoving that plant down into a hole that's too small. So those are the kinds of things to think about. I'm not sure where exactly you wanted to go into, from there.
Well, one of the things that I often get asked is when you kind of mentioned soil preparation a little bit, till or don't till. Don't till.
Yeah.
Remember how I talked about churning up the soil? These soils have been churned up and turned over so many times. I know my mother taught me when we were putting in gardens, you always turned over the soil. Well, as it turns out, what you find out when you do that is you're actually breaking up some of the natural chemistry and microbial action. So all these tiny little creatures in the soil. Soil is a living, breathing organism. That's the way you need to think of it. And by doing that, you're actually disturbing them and reducing their effectiveness. So you don't want to turn over that soil. You don't need to till it. What kind of soil?
And I know we said that urban compacted soil doesn't maybe have very many of those interactions. They are still there. They are drastically minimized versus the native forest out somewhere, but they are still there. So we like to preserve what is there if we can. Right.
And that's a good segue, because the next thing that commonly get asked is, well, what can I put into that soil to fix it? And again, you need to be careful about thinking that way, because soils change over eons, long periods of time. We call it geologic time, meaning hundreds, thousands of years. But one of the best things that you can do to a heavily compacted clay soil is add organic matter, leaf compost, mulch, things like that. Now, understanding mulch may impede the spread or of some of your grasses and flowers that you plant there. But it's also going to keep weeds down in a lot of cases as well. So it's kind of a give and take type of thing. But any type of organic matter that you can put down, just put it on top of the soil. Really, if you want to work it in a little bit with a hard garden rake and kind of scratch the surface, that's fine too, because that kind of breaks up a little bit of that surface compaction and allows that organic matter to start to filter in. And it's amazing how quickly you will notice a difference.
Yeah.
In a couple years, you'll start to see this little thin, dark colored layer at the top of your soils, and that's that organic matter breaking down. And like I said, the chemical reactions and those tiny microscopic little creatures that are making soils happy will just blossom. So that's really the only thing you need to do. So if you dig a hole, put back in the hole what came out of it. Don't add any magical sauce. Don't go buy a bag or something.
Don't need to line the bottom with rock to help water drain. These plants were put them there because they're going to be put there because you chose the correct growing conditions, and that's where they need to learn and establish how to grow there. So
exactly,
adding any little soil there. Remember, roots of every plant that we're talking about for this, native, their roots go either really deep or they spread very far. Trees and shrubs, they're going to spread a lot further than where the leaves stop. The branches and the leaves of the shrub or the tree. And the native plants, the roots are going to go a lot deeper than the first 6, 8 inches or 12 inches where you just threw some compost or topsoil. So it really has marginal effect. These need to get down and establish in the exact growing medium they're going to be in for the long term.
And in a lot of cases, it can actually have a detrimental effect. If you create a nice little tiny pocket of decent growing conditions and the other stuff is not great, because you've picked a plant that's not well adapted to those harsher conditions, the roots are going to grow around in that tiny little spot and be very impacted by dry and wet conditions. So if it's really wet, the hole's going to flood and stay flooded and drown out the plant potentially. If it dries out, that's the first part of the area that's going to dry out, and the rest of it will stay wet, and that moisture's not going to seep into that area. So yeah, you want to be very careful about that. Make sure you're planting something that's adapted to the conditions that you have. Don't be thinking, well, I can make this area better. Probably you can't. Okay?
Remember, he said it takes eons.
Yes.
Eons for a site, the soil to change. So
if we lived 1,000 years, you might be able to affect it.
Right. And so then another part of that site preparation before you actually put the plants in the ground is, whether it's a bed or one specific spot. A lot of folks have questions about.
I have a question.
We have a question, sure.
So Jenny is wondering what to do about English ivy and poison ivy.
Okay.
You guys going to talk about invasives and stuff?
Yeah, we will touch on invasives a little bit later, and yeah, poison ivy is one of those things you're going to run into. And I always say this, and people always give me stares, but poison ivy is a native plant. It naturally grows here in Missouri. No, it's not really something we want around where we're going to have a lot of people and things like that. It actually does wonderful things for birds and turns brilliant colors in the fall, but we don't want it around our public spaces. So yeah, we'll talk about that process a little bit later on.
And so what I wanted to touch on quickly was, do we need a weed barrier or something to get rid of the grass? Do we need to kill all the grass around the whole bed? Do we need to, put in a weed barrier to prevent grass and other weeds, unwanted plants to come up through? I say no. There's a lot of different schools of thought on this, but if we're doing this, again, kind of holistically, a lot of times something like a material that can break down, you have like cardboard or newspaper I've seen done before. Mm-hmm. You can even put something like that out for a time before you dig the holes and plant the bed, and that shading out of the grasses will kill them back to start. And then you can leave that there and put mulch and stuff over it, and it will break down in time. I've also seen folks do a lot of different things with tarps. Same idea. The tarp is put down for a significant amount of time, and it kills the grass in the area that you are going to be planting. And then you remove that and obviously keep it out of there, and then put your plants and your mulch material back into the site.
By significant amount of time, like what, a month?
Yeah.
Yeah, so and keep in mind when you do that, you're killing the stuff that's sprouted up now. Just remember
Right.
there's always seeds in the soil. So as soon as you expose that, some of those seeds are going to start to germinate. So
Right.
there is no quick and easy fix when it comes to taking care of weeds or problematic plants or things that you're going to have to deal with. It's part of maintaining a garden, and if you don't like to do that, you probably ought to pick something else to do with your time.
So we've prepared our site. We've we've talked about, if you're going to, again, plant small plants, dig that. Anything you're going to do, it's the kind of rules of thumb are all over the place, guidelines to follow, and sometimes they can get us in trouble when we hold very true to those, but they are good to have in the back of our mind. And one of those, with the hole size for whatever you're going to plant, 2 to 3 times wider than what you're going to put in the ground, whether it is small or it's a big, shade tree. 2 to 3 times wider is a pretty good size hole to allow those roots of the plant to be able to kind of spread out and then get started and penetrate out into the soil they're going to live in.
And wider than the root ball he's talking about. So when you take the plant out of whatever size container, there'll be a little bit of soil with roots attached to it. So whatever size that is,
Yes.
2 to 3 times bigger than that.
Yes.
My rule of thumb is if your hole doesn't look ridiculously large, you need to widen it out more. It doesn't mean you have to dig it a whole lot deeper. As a matter of
Right.
fact, you don't want to really dig it any deeper than what the bottom of that root ball is. But the wider you can dig it, again, you've got time constraints here. Actually, the better, because you are loosening up the soil in that
Yes.
area. You're not really turning it over, you're loosening it up, which is very important.
Yes, and then once established, every plant, no matter the species, it needs some initial watering, because that has either been sitting from the time you picked it up. You don't know when it last got watered before when you picked it up, and then obviously there may be some time before planting, and so as soon as installed, get some water on it, and really you can kind of soak it in that hole of whatever it is. Don't feel bad that the water's kind of bubbling up and out, and you may think, oh, I flooded it. That's good, because what it's going to do is settle that soil back all together that you've backfilled the hole with, and kind of get the oxygen out of there, just enough so that instead of smashing it down with our feet to compact the loose dirt in, let the water do the work, because you're A, watering the plant, and you're B, settling all that soil in for the long term.
Yeah, that's one of the things that's always mystified me, is we go to all this work to tell you to dig a nice wide planting hole, and people get their feet in there and start compacting the soil back down around the feet, around the plant. No, don't do that. You should leave it uncompacted.
Yeah.
That's why you want to dig a wider hole. Let the water settle that soil in around the plant. What you want is a nice intimate contact between the roots and the soil. And it's amazing how quickly, and I'm as much as I'm a plant nerd, so I've done this on my own, and go back a few days later, a week later sometimes, and start to excavate a little bit. You can see how quickly the roots will move out, especially of small flowers and grasses, move out of that root ball area that came with the plant into that surrounding soil, days to weeks. So in the spring and fall, it can happen very, very quickly. So the wider the hole, the better you are, really.
Yeah.
But we call it digging the $1,000 hole for the $1 plant is really what you want to do. That's the whole idea. Is take some time, and I would just like to reiterate the watering. Even if it's the forecasted rain for later on in the evening, water it in. If it's not raining at the time you're planting, water the plant in. And if it's a light rain, just a little sprinkle, water the plant in. Make sure it's watered in, because again, you're settling that soil as well as getting some water to a plant.
And again, this actually loops back to your planning portion, because as you're thinking through your neighbor's naturescaping project, think about available water, because that's going to be something that you're going to need throughout this whole process.
Yeah.
And so you don't want to get so excited and you have 5 to 10 people and you think we have a good workforce, and then you plant 150 to 300 plants on a site and realize, we have them in the ground and we don't have a good water source. So think of those things again. It goes a long way that might be a limiting factor on how big and how many plants you put in, as to how much water you have available and how far you have to go to get it.
Yeah, and if you have the resources on the site, you can have people planting and people following up with the watering and spreading some compost or mulch, as the process moves along through the garden. So definitely take that work into account when you're planning out how much to get done. It's always better to start really small. And again, you might think it's ridiculously small, but start there, be successful, and then increase the size as people see what's going on, look at your project and go, man, that's really cool. I'd like to help out with something like that. And you'll gain people that way. But if you start, I want to build this 100-foot by 100-foot massive garden and have flowers and trees and beautiful things everywhere. Yeah, we all do. We all want that. But how much can you manage? How much can you take care of? What resources do you have? I know it's been said, but I'm going to repeat it because it's really important. Because some of us, like myself, tend to have, our eyes and our projects get a little bit too big for what we can handle.
Yeah.
Sometimes.
And on that note too, one thing that I think gets overlooked, but it's very important for this plant healthcare process, because once you get these in the ground, you get them established, it kind of moves to this like monitoring phase. That's a big portion of this plant healthcare, is monitoring. Because if you're not out there and in the area to see what is happening, if a leaf is starting to get really chewed on by an insect, or the flowers seem to just like not be flowering out, whatever issue seems to be arising, if you're able to see it when it's on a couple leaves or one stem of a flower, you can hopefully address and diagnose it before it spreads to the entire site. And part of that, I think, starts back here with installation, with labeling of your plants. Whether it's just a small white tag that costs a few dollars at a garden center, or a sign that someone could see walking by from the sidewalk. If you're going to have a group of individuals that are either new to this or are coming in or coming out, some may stop helping, you may get some new volunteers. Having the plants labeled can go a long way to explaining how to care for these plants and what they should look like versus what looks wrong. So I think labeling is something we don't talk about enough, especially on a project like some of these Neighbors Naturescaping projects.
Yeah, and you're going to forget. I have stuff in my yard that popped up and I was like, boy, I don't remember planting that. Some cases I didn't, in some cases I did. And it's like, boy, I don't remember what that was. So if you don't remember what it was, then you're not really going to know how to take care of it. Take care of it. Did I put it in the right place?
Yeah.
Has it volunteered up on its own? That's going to happen sometimes.
Or I'm new to native plants. Is that a weed or is that what I want?
Exactly.
Is that a weed or is that what I want? It happens to everybody.
It does. It does. So yeah, labeling and knowing what you have is really an important thing. So I guess, again, along with the monitoring that you're talking about, understand that there's a lot fewer pest problems than what we think. So insect and disease issues are out there for all types of plants. Doesn't matter whether it's flowers, shrubs, trees. There's always a fungus or a bug that's going to want to make use of that plant. It's part of nature, and that's really the holistic way to look at it. So a couple of leaves affected on a plant really aren't a big deal. They're probably not affecting the health of that plant so much.
As long as you've determined what is
right.
Yes,
but understanding the scale of things that are going on and realizing that most problems actually start with lack of water, too much sunlight, not enough sunlight. So those, and if you were paying attention, go right back to, have you put the right plant in the right place? That's why all this kind of dovetails together. So so say you wanted to try to put a plant in a certain spot and you find out, well, it actually needs a little bit more water than what that dry site usually gets, but it doesn't get it. Maybe all this rain we've been getting shuts off now and we're completely dry for about 3 months. Well, you're probably going to see those plants start to suffer first. You'll see some discolored leaves drop off. You might be thinking insect and disease when in reality, it's just a lack of water or too much water problem.
Yeah, a big part of monitoring is monitoring to see if it's getting watered enough or not. And that's what we said, water during establishment. Watering doesn't stop. It doesn't stop. The first year is important. The 5th year is important. So a lot of this monitoring phase, as Mark is saying, is the plant getting enough, too much, or not enough water?
And hopefully with that, you kind of realize you have to know a lot of stuff. You have to not only know what kind of plant it is, but you have to know what that plant likes and doesn't like. And once you have an understanding of that, then you can really figure out, okay, I have to water this plant in this spot once a week. But this one over here, because maybe I've got a glade plant like what's planted in this dry area back here, I don't have to water it except for every 2 weeks or 3 weeks. And you'll get an understanding, but it's always good to have a level of that at the beginning.
Right.
And then the more time you spend out there, really the more understanding you're going to get to have where certain plants thrive, where they don't. So, maybe we change out a species here in subsequent years.
Yeah.
So that's all part of this monitoring phase.
And we're here to help. Brightside is
Absolutely.
absolutely here to help. Brightside keeps pamphlets and information here on these very subjects. So if you start to feel overwhelmed, there's help available, and we're always here, willing to be able to give some of this advice.
Right,
well.
a lot of great resources out there. The Missouri Botanical Garden is a great resource. They have a hotline you can contact.
Yeah.
So all kinds of things. If you're having some problems with the plants and you can't figure out what's going on, we don't expect you to be, experts in identifying insects and disease issues. But snapping a picture with your phone and saying, hey, this particular plant is doing this thing, and just relaying that to people that have that expertise goes a long way. Because that really helps us let you know what the issue is and how to take care of it. And it might be, don't worry about it, it's going to be fine. It does that this time of year.
Yeah, and remember, we're putting these plants out here not only because they're going to beautify a spot, they're also providing for critters, for pollinators, for insects. And almost all insects have some form of stage where they'll feed on something somewhere.
Right.
So just because, like Mark was saying, a couple leaves get chewed off or eaten up, that might be just what we want. But we also just maybe want to follow up and make sure it's not some sort of pest that is coming in and something new, something that could be harmful. So that's where you use your resources to determine.
Yeah, plants are not just there for beauty. They have a function, and an important function. And, we've gone through a stretch maybe about 20 or 30 years where if you saw a bug on a plant, you got out your insecticide and you killed it. Well, that's not very smart because we cause other problems by doing that. You can actually increase pest problems by doing those types of things. Nature has a way of keeping these insect and disease problems not in a balance, but in a flux that's usually below damaging levels. Every once in a while, something will have a particularly good year. We have a really wet, cool spring. We have a lot of leaf diseases that are just really happy with what's going on. Is it the end of the world? No. Sycamores in particular, if you have one of those in your yard, it probably looks really bare right now.
Yeah, and it looks scary when you first see it out the window and you think that the tree is dying, it never leafed out or the case. But it just looks bad. That's about it. That's about the extent of it, because this is a cyclical fungus that will maybe be kept in check the next season. So
yeah, in about a month, the tree's going to have leaves on it. You may not even know that anything was ever wrong.
Right.
And that's true of most everything. So it's really, when you're monitoring, as Danny was talking about, understanding what the needs of those plants are is so important. So,
Can we
question?
jump in for a second with
Sure,
that?
Please do.
While you're talking about the right plant for the right place, can you talk about trees and electric wires?
Sure.
Because you can see the fringe tree and
yeah.
the button bush.
Yeah, so if you didn't hear, Mary Lou was asking about available space, and we touched on that a little bit, but right plant, right place, talking about overhead wires. You're going to run into these in a lot of your yards or lots, whatever space you might be working with. And so there are very definitely appropriate plants to be putting underneath power lines. As Danny had mentioned earlier, underneath the power line is not an appropriate place to put a beautiful oak tree. It's very important that we have electricity. We all like our electricity. We probably all like our air conditioning in the summertime. So putting a big shade tree underneath the wires, it's not Ameren's or the electric utility's fault when it comes through and gets pruned. It's the fault of the person that put the tree there. Sometimes trees do start up on their own, yes, but that's just not an appropriate place to have a big tall tree. So we have, as Mary Lou mentioned, we have a button bush here and a fringe tree kind of back off over there in our glade area that we talked about. And those are not going to get big enough to get up into those electric wires and cause them problems. So they're very appropriate for those sites.
And also, when we talk about electric wires, we don't just mean the really tall wires at the top of these poles. What is considered energized and you have to expect clearance to be pruned from outside of your control is from the lowest wires on that utility pole. which are typically telephone or cable. But those companies, while it may be sporadic, you may say, I haven't seen them come through here for 15 years. That still may happen at any time, and those trees that grow into that can still be considered a hazard and energized if you were working in and around them. So be very cautious. Be very cautious with that.
I have another question.
Sure.
It says, what's the right plant in the right place for a shady place, stream bank, to replace bush honeysuckle?
Well, okay. I know what you would want us to do. You want us to list off about 5 of our favorite plants and tell you what to put in there. That is absolutely something that we will not do. Okay? This is where, as we said before, that your research comes in. This is the fun part. I don't know what you like. We don't know what the other conditions are. Shady and streamside, yes, that's somewhat helpful, and you can kind of look in and amongst this wet area. There's 9 bark planted here, which is a shrub. We have something that's called blue star, which is still kind of blooming sporadically back over along the parking lot that gets a lot of water. Alicia's panning over to it now. It's the taller plant to the right side of your screen. That's a great one to put in. But again, you need to do more research. Dig a test hole. Do all those types of things that we talked about. And go to the Missouri Botanical Garden website. You can just type in Missouri Botanical Garden Plant Finder, and you'll see a checklist. And you just toggle little things on and off, wet, dry, sunny, shady, and it's going to generate a list of plants for you that you can then do some more research on. There's also a Missouri native little button that you can toggle to make sure that you just get native plants. The great thing is that there's literally hundreds of plants that you can choose from to put in those types of areas. That's also the bad thing, because it can overwhelm people. And oftentimes people want us to say, oh, we'll just plant this, this, and this there. Well, but I'm not doing justice to the question by providing that answer. I want you to plant something that you like to
and
put
to
in.
segue onto that, if it does seem overwhelming, there are hundreds. One thing we as people shortchange ourselves on is time. Clear the invasives out and focus on just keeping the invasives out and give yourself time. You'd be surprised what will naturally sprout back up that is native to that site, because the native seed bank can lay dormant for a long time, years. And so then you can identify the sprouts that are coming up and then further help that along by buying more of what's coming up if you feel necessary. Because sometimes we, as humans, I feel the same way in my own backyard. I get rushing and I want to get gallon-sized container plants rather than letting something go from seed, because it takes longer. But then that is what is naturally growing on that site. Maybe I'll just help the process along.
I think it was in Jurassic Park where it said nature will find a way. That's a true statement. It actually will. Sometimes there's going to be some things that you don't want in there. Poison ivy would be a great example if you're going to be in that area quite a bit, or there's kids down in that area. If it's not a spot where people are going, maybe you want to let it do its thing. Just don't go down there and get poison ivy. But yeah, it's amazing how many plants will pop up on their own once you just get some sun to the ground, and then you can kind of manage that, add to it, don't add to it as you see fit. So one of the things we are happy to do, to further follow up on that question, if you generate a list of plants and then come to us with that list of plants, hey, I looked at these, it looks like they'll work in this spot that I have, could you just give me a little more information on them, or just tell me what you think? We're happy to do that.
Absolutely.
Have those discussions with you. It's just that one of the problems that you run into with gardening is people want that immediate answer. What should I put there? Well, I don't know, because I don't know what you like. I want you to put in what you like, what you appreciate, and then we'll say, that's an excellent choice. No, that's not so great a choice for that particular site. Yeah, could be problematic for you. We'd be happy to lend you that expertise.
So then, whether it is dealing with something like bush honeysuckle, or we've had some questions about that already, and this is a good part. As we work through this plant health care process within this monitoring, you're not only monitoring the water, the plant's need of water, any pests or diseases. You're also monitoring for any species of plants that are growing up in there that not only do you not want in your bed, but maybe may be detrimental to the whole area or region, and that is where we get into these things like bush honeysuckle, one's called autumn olive, your winter creeper euonymus, some of these
English ivy.
English ivy,
earlier.
yes. You can purchase these from a nursery, but typically when we talk about invasive species, it's something that is not indigenous to that area that you're trying to work in, and it also is becoming a nuisance. And then when we talk about, and it could be from Missouri, an example that we use is eastern red cedar. It's an evergreen, it's big and kind of bushy, and it can overtake some natural areas like a glade if not kept in check. Well, it's native to the United States. Just it becomes a nuisance, and it becomes an invasive species on that site.
Well, let's be careful with that. I want to be real cautionary when using that term invasive. And the great example that we've had already is the question of poison ivy and English ivy. Poison ivy is a Missouri native plant, as Danny said, indigenous. That just means it was here prior to European settlement. It can grow in areas where we don't want it to. That is not, by definition, invasive. Invasive has to be a species that is not and never was native to this part of the world. It has been introduced from another part of the world. The term we really use for those plants, for eastern red cedar, poison ivy, other native plants that we might have stuck in our garden because we wanted them there, and now they're just growing unchecked, and they're actually shading out or overgrowing other plants, is aggressive. So there's aggressive plants, there's invasive plants. Invasive plants we definitely don't want. We want them out at all costs, at any expense, because they're really harmful to the environment. Hugely harmful, and that's a topic in and of itself that we could go on for hours. Aggressive plants are those that become an annoyance to us, really. Maybe they start to grow off-site, maybe they grow in areas where they didn't typically grow, but they're in spots where we don't want them. They too may need to be pulled out, but we're not going to work on eradicating something like that. We're going to diminish the numbers some, get them out of the spaces where we don't want them, versus an invasive species, English ivy, bush honeysuckle, winter creeper, those we want out at any cost.
And it's important to note too, as you're planning out your installation and things, just because you can purchase it from a nursery, a garden center, a big box store, it doesn't mean that it's been deemed safe for the environment. I just want to preface that. So things like English ivy and winter creeper euonymus, it's still available. And so,
not through Brightside, it's not.
That's right.
That's why we have that recommended plant list with our neighbors.
Right.
Exactly.
Right, exactly.
There you go. So stick to that recommended plant list, and then maybe even spider off of that. But to start there, it's a good.
And really,
good
the message that we've said over and over and over and over again is know your plant. I mean, that's really what it's come down to. If you know the plant, you're going to be so much more successful. You're going to understand, oh, we should plant it here. Oh, no, we shouldn't plant this here. That's bad. Okay, well, what else can we put in?
And
so making those choices.
Part of your planning of your site, we keep looping back to this beginning, is just take a gander around to the neighboring properties, whether it's vacant, whether it's a manicured yard or a street corner, but just keep an eye out there and see if there are any potential issues you'll be dealing with over and over, because while you and your group of folks may be doing a really good job of controlling the weeds and things you don't want, if there's a big old patch of winter creeper euonymus covering a really big old garage on a corner, you're going to always be dealing with it trying to invade that spot you're working on. So you're always going to want to say, okay, as that question was, how do I control this ivy that's always going to be trying to get in there?
Can also look at it as an opportunity. Maybe you can gauge them in conversation and just say, hey, we're going to be putting in this garden here. One of the plants we see growing up the side of your building is particularly harmful, and take the opportunity to teach people. Some will be willing to listen, obviously, and some won't care, but it's always good to get the neighborhood and other people involved, if nothing else, that they just keep an eye out on what's going on over there, or understand what's going on and say, oh wow, I didn't know I had this plant in my yard that's especially harmful. I'll work on getting it out. And then hopefully you've made a friend. So
through this process of plant healthcare, you'll see we really haven't mentioned pesticides at all, and that's because if you're following this process, you can hopefully really minimize the pesticide use down to really those invasive species that sometimes there is just no other alternative than very diligently using something like a glyphosate, which is the active ingredient in Roundup and there's other generic names for it, but glyphosate is the active ingredient. Something like that, it can be a very good tool in the toolbox to utilize when you're dealing with something like bush honeysuckle or winter creeper euonymus. But following the label is key. We're not just going to get on here and talk about all these different rates and things because we don't know the exact situation that might be needed the stuff need to be applied in. But the label, following the label, is what will keep you and keep the site, from being detrimental, from your use being detrimental to the environment. Also, the method of application. If it's simply spraying out into the air onto something, maybe that's not the best method for control for that plant. Something like a large bush honeysuckle that has a stem that comes down to maybe 2 or 3 inches in diameter. Just spraying the leaves, it really isn't necessarily having the effect that cutting it and then using a wand or a sponge or a wipe to actually wipe a higher concentration of the chemical right onto the trunk and not letting it run off the sides. That is minimizing the exposure to other plants and animals to that chemical and targeting what you're trying to target. And so those are the types of ideas you want to seek out when you're controlling these species.
And minimizing the amount of product that you have to use, because usually misuse means you're using at a higher rate than what is recommended. Well, that's misuse. You're the problem, not the product. And
right.
There's a lot of bad information out there about a variety of different herbicides, pesticides. But quite honestly, most of the time the problem is us, not the product. It's misuse of the product. We are the problem. So educate yourself, make your own choices. But in some cases, with invasive species especially, you're gonna have to pretty much go to an herbicide. I've heard in particular cases people say, well, you can just get vinegar and rock salt. Well, just because it's a natural product doesn't make it less toxic. As a matter of fact, that's way more toxic than most herbicides that are out there. In olden days when advancing armies came through, what would they do to the fields? They would salt the fields to keep plants from growing. Salt in high concentrations is incredibly toxic to nature. So natural things don't mean less toxic.
Right.
So educate yourself on that. We'd be happy to provide you some additional information on invasive species control. Our website has all kinds of information. So you can go to Missouri that one doesn't work anymore, mdc.mo.gov, and you can type in bush honeysuckle into the search box, and you can get all kinds of information on how to control, when to control, what to apply, what methods work, what methods don't work. There's all kinds of information.
Yes, we have things for winter creeper. We have a lot of the main species that are dealt with all over the region. We do have pages for that. And also wanted to say we do get asked a lot for these holistic approaches to manage. The most holistic way is, it may be backbreaking, but yes, it's pulling. So start there.
But do keep in mind that sometimes, like English ivy would be a great example. That's not going to work.
Exactly.
You can't pull it up.
So it's kind of a gradient scale depending on what you're dealing with and how long that has been there and how big it is.
Yep, absolutely. And really, I think we're kind of talking about the maintenance phase. So monitoring to maintenance. You're looking at what's going on in your garden, and then you're deciding what to do. So is it thinning some plants down because they're starting to become aggressive? Getting rid of those invasive species by hand control, whatever control methods will work. Maybe a little bit of herbicide, judiciously and properly used herbicide work might be appropriate in certain cases. Bermuda grass is going to be something that probably a lot of you are going to fight in your gardens because the roots will actually grow feet below the soil line, and that one's really hard to try to control. You're not going to pull it or dig it out. So again, in that case, you might have to go to an herbicide. But just make sure you're following label directions. You've identified what it is that you want to control and how to control it. And then, as Danny mentioned before, in the maintenance phase, obviously you're providing water. If our faucet turns off and we start to grow incredibly dry, one of the most stressful things for a lot of plants is going from very wet to very dry conditions. So you want to make sure and water judiciously. Again, according to the plants that you've planted, do they like a lot of water? Do they not like a lot of water? Knowing that and then watering appropriately is very important. Usually the next question then is, well, how do I know when I've watered appropriately? Stick your finger in the dirt, people. We're gardeners. I'm not trying to, well, I am making a joke, but I'm serious as well. This is how you figure out if there's enough water in there. Again, you know the plant. Stick your finger in the dirt. If it's soggy, got enough water. If it's dry, you probably need to water. If you wanted to get down a little deeper than that, you can use a long bladed screwdriver, just anything that you can get down in the soil, maybe 9 to 12 inches, and just kind of spin it around and rub that soil that comes off from the deepest part between your fingers. And if it forms a little ball or a ribbon, you're probably in good shape. If it's dry and crumbly, give it some water. There's no magic formula.
No.
You'll hear sometimes an inch of water a week. Well, for what plant?
Right.
Some plants that's too much water, some plants that's too little water. So know your plant first, know whether that's a wet area or a dry area, and manage your watering accordingly.
And another thing we can do of senses is if you're putting your finger down into the hole, or you're either digging or using a screwdriver, and you smell, if it has that real I kind of say that hog smell. It smells like it just smells almost
smells like something died. Usually.
Yes, exactly. That's a sign that there's not enough oxygen in the soil there, which means usually too much water. So all the water has pushed into the pores of the soil and pushed the oxygen out, and so that is a sign of overwatering, or an area that might be collecting too much water to, for the time being.
That's a good segue to talk about soil health, soil and root health a little bit in your maintenance. Roots are an incredibly important but often overlooked part of the plant. How do you get to the root system? Well, by properly watering, but understand that oxygen that Danny was talking about is just as important as water to root systems. Some plants, like this 9-bark that we've showed you a couple times, the big bald cypress tree over there, they can grow in very, very wet areas where there's a lot of water and not much soil oxygen. But we kill as many plants through overwatering as we do underwatering. So again, I know we've said it a million times, I'm going to say it again. Make sure you know your plant and know what it likes and manage that accordingly. So you in some of those areas where maybe you dig your test hole and boy, it just through all times a year, whether there's a spring that got buried or something else, it always kind of has that stinky smell. Well, be thinking about plants that grow in a swamp, because they'll actually tolerate those types of conditions and do just fine there. But one of the things that you can do if you have a larger tree on your site already and you want to manage it, or your tree that's getting up in size, aerating. Actually, aerating your soil is a wonderful thing that you can do. It's fairly easy. You can rent a soil auger from some of the big box hardware stores.
Yeah, we're not talking about a lawn aerator.
Correct.
It's not the little plugs that get pulled out of the ground. This is a little more in depth.
Yeah, it's a glorified drill is what it is. You're going to have a drill bit that's about 2 inches in size, and just drilling some holes to get some oxygen down into the soil is one of the best tree maintenance techniques that you can do for bigger trees. But again, understanding root systems, that they need oxygen, they need moisture, and managing those conditions. You're not going to be able to get more oxygen into the ground without doing some type of aerating, and then managing the water. I think we've kind of talked about as well. So did you want to show off some information there?
Yeah, I was just going to say, through this whole thing, we've talked about, like I said, a lot of information in a brief amount of time. We've done a little overview of many parts of the process of establishing and caring for these plants. But it may seem overwhelming, but just like we said, don't forget, there are a lot of resources. This is a whole stack of literature that is available right here at Brightside. Again, call first or reach out to see how we're going with our COVID regulations and things right now. But this stuff is here. That can either be mailed to you. You could either pick it up, or a lot of it's available electronically. Anything from, remember all those characteristics we talked about? Well, here's a list of plants when they're different characteristics on how they survive. That, and how they're good for birds and pollinators, bloom times. A list like this that's available right here can help you to decide, okay, if I plant this here in the spring, it will flower, and then over here, the summer will be flowering. So something may be flowering in your area the entire time of the year. Gardening for butterflies, milkweeds for monarchs, just all kinds of different literature that's already available, and some of them actually have some design ideas. This is a good one here. It has native plants recommendations in it, but also how to lay out a garden using the slope and soil that is there. It has some design ideas in it, and also has some replacement ideas for invasive species.
The Grow Native website also has some model garden layouts on it as well that you can look at. Do you want to, as Danny had shown, garden for butterflies, garden for birds, season-long bloom time, those types of things. And you can see their examples and work with those. Put your own stuff in, experiment. That's the fun to this whole thing, I mean, we keep talking about all the work that's involved in maintenance and things like that. Well, there's fun parts too. So experiment, have some fun, see what works, see what doesn't, and, make your changes accordingly. So, the only other things I think we haven't really talked about some on the maintenance phase of things, mulching maybe a little bit. We did talk about adding organic matter to the soil and how important that is. Mulch is obviously great for keeping weeds down, but as you keep weeds down, just remember if you're trying to get flowers to spread and things like that, you're going to limit the spread of those flowers as well. So sometimes a thinner layer of mulch, maybe a 1/2 inch to 1 inch deep, will keep some of the weed seeds from sprouting and coming up and still allow some of those native species to spread, or you can encourage the spread of some of the other plants. And again, as that material breaks down, it's adding organic matter to the soil, which actually loosens up those clays and allows for much better water and oxygen infiltration into the soil. Did we have a question?
We do have a couple questions.
Shoot.
Sure.
Now,
This is a good time, yeah.
when we talked about soil testing, there is a cost to that.
Correct.
It's $25 currently to have the regular test done to check the pH.
Right. So just in case you didn't hear that, $25 to have a soil test done through Extension. There is a cost to it. And that's why we say, unless, and I don't think anybody's going to have a garden that's that big, go ahead and take multiple locations, but mix it all together in one bag. And then that way you'll get an idea of kind of what's going on throughout the site. And they'll give you recommendations on, and especially if you provide them with some information. I want to have this type of garden here. I want to plant trees and shrubs. I want to plant a lot of flowers. I want native grasses. As much information as you can give them on what you want to grow there. They'll tailor their recommendations based on your soil test for how you can maintain or manage that soil as well.
Yeah, and some.
Another question: do you put, when you're digging that hole for planting your plant, do you put water in that hole before the plant? And what do we do about fertilizer?
We were gonna come to fertilizers. I was saving that one for the last.
So wait to water until the plant is in and you've filled the soil back in, because as we said, that water will help to settle everything down and bring that to the level. And you may, after watering, see that the soil you filled in sunk down too far. You may need to add a little more. So yeah, wait till the end. No need to pre-soak the hole. That's what the watering in part for is for after.
It also makes the planting process a lot muddier.
Yes.
So,
Absolutely.
Just from a practical point of view, you'll be head to toe in mud if you try to do it that way. Some of your smaller plants may float around if you've got water sitting in the hole. So wait until afterwards. This is a good time to talk about fertilizers. And the reason why we saved it for last is because the general recommendation is don't. In only specific cases where your soil test, based on what you said you want to try to grow there, recommends utilizing some fertilizers, generally do not. Because again, what we want to try to do to manage our soil is get that organic matter built back up, because it gets removed off of soils when homes and things get built, buildings get built, and that doesn't replenish very quickly. So we want to start the process of building that up. And when you do that, all that fun chemistry and those tiny little microorganisms, as they break it down, that actually naturally releases nutrients in that material and provides it to the plant. Fertilizers, I want to make sure everybody understands. Danny's going to smile here. He knows what I'm going to say. Fertilizer is not food. There's no such thing as plant food. The only thing that feeds plants is the big yellow thing up in the sky. That provides energy for the plant. What fertilizers do is maybe provide some nutrients that may be missing out of the soil. The problem is that in most fertilizers that are used, they're in salt concentrations. What did I talk about is toxic in some levels to a lot of plants and to those natural organisms in a soil. Fertilizer is one of the most toxic things that you can put down to a soil. Yes, you may see a spurt of growth, but you're actually killing in vast numbers those natural microorganisms that were helping to provide nutrients in the first place. So you're artificially, you're almost, I almost hate to use this term, but I'm going to do it. You're almost creating a drug addict, because you're creating a plant that now becomes reliant on you artificially providing something that these natural organisms were providing, maybe at not high enough level, but that's why we're trying to increase the organic matter, because we're going to get that level back up to what it was or should be. So only if your soil test says, yeah, your nutrient levels are so low, you're going to have to add something.
Right.
Then it's appropriate. Otherwise, it is not appropriate.
Because as Mark outlined, this is providing some nutrients that what they're doing is telling that plant to grow. Well, what it's doing is growing not in balance. It's not growing holistically as it would if it was growing roots. What we are in the business of here, I say business, what our purpose is here with our projects is to get the plants established. And by that, think root establishment. Because if the roots are established, the above ground portion we see will follow, and it will follow very quickly if the roots can get established. Fertilizer doesn't work necessarily to establishing roots. When excess nitrogen is put into a plant, it encourages foliar growth, above ground growth. And if that plant doesn't have the resources to sustain itself, as Mark said, it becomes reliant on the fertilizer, reliant on that nitrogen to sustain all those leaves that are trying to soak up all that sun, that don't have enough water being pulled up out of the ground because the root system hasn't gotten expansive enough to be in balance. So that is where we can get into trouble with fertilizer, kind of getting a little more in that, is offsetting that balance, kind of that whole nature knows best thing. These trees are already programmed. They have cells that are allocating energy to the bottom, to the roots and to the leaves in balance. And so by injecting, something in there that it offsets that balance, you can get into a scenario when, if that fertilizer isn't applied, the tree starts to wilt or crash out, the plant, because again, the roots haven't been established. So again, sometimes there's just nothing better than hard work and patience.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and in many cases, you can actually fertilize a plant to death, essentially, especially a newly planted plant. That is not the time to be trying to promote leaf and top growth. As Danny said, that's when you want roots. So get your fertilizer out of there. Don't put it down. Let that plant establish roots and get to the point where it can support what it has.
Right.
And then it's going to take off and grow. And by putting down good amounts of organic matter and making sure you're doing that on an annual basis, most likely, and replenishing that, because what you want to see is when you put that leaf compost down, and don't put 6 inches of it, put a ½ inch, maybe layer down, maybe scratch it into the soil a little bit as soil preparation at the beginning. If that goes away really fast, that's what you'll want, because that says, okay, I've got some good activity going on here. Those organisms that are trying to do their thing and replenish those nutrient levels in the soil naturally, boy, when it does that, you've got them there, and you know that you're going to have good success managing the soil that way. So replenish it, keep it going. You're going to have plenty of nutrients. Nobody does any fertilization out in the woods or in any of our natural areas except nature. So the only reason why we have to do it and maintain yards and gardens is because we've messed something up. And in this case, we've messed our soils up to the point where sometimes they are needed. But we put down way too much fertilizer. It is not plant food. It's not something that my plant looks like it's struggling a little bit, I'll just throw a little fertilizer down. Well, it could be exactly the wrong thing to do. So that's you always want to go in educated, have a soil test. If it says to put some down, it's going to give you the rate, what to put down, how to do it, and everything. Follow those guidelines.
It's important to just remember, I keep saying patience, especially when we plant these native plants. There's a lot of sayings out there like that. I can't remember them right now, but the point is, don't expect, we all want results. We all want to see that hard work pay off at the, putting them in over the winter or really early spring, and then by this time of year, things are blooming and thriving and all kinds of things are happening. It may take 1, 2, probably more than likely 3 years with a lot of these native plants. And all of a sudden, if you keep putting that hard work in, you'll walk out one day in that 3rd or 4th year, end of second, somewhere in that time, and it'll look like this, and you're going to say, whoa. I mean, it does happen, and all of a sudden it will feel really good because it takes some time for those roots to get established. But we're not kidding. Once they do, these plants do take off. And so just have patience, and hopefully you or your group of folks have a little bit of resolve to be able to say, we're in this for the long haul, and we won't give up, because it's worth it. It totally is worth it, because it's kind of like the field of dreams. If you build it, they will come. I think he will come, as they say anyways. But the insects find it. I mean, they really do, and it is amazing to see the buzz. Even in those years that it may not be flowering, you'll still see some different critters buzzing and using those plants, and it's really neat to see.
It is. It's fantastic. And then nature is working, and it's doing its thing, and it's going to require less maintenance from you in those types of situations. So I saw one other thing. We might want to talk about that, the Liebig's Law, the minimum, a little bit.
Sure.
Get a little sciencey on them.
Let me push up my glasses.
Yeah, there you go. Put a little Band-Aid around them. So there's a sciencey type of formula out there that sometimes gets referred to as Liebig's Law, the minimum, but it paints a pretty good picture on how to provide, maintain, and manage everything from soil up to your plants itself. And so what it says basically is think of everything a plant needs as a barrel, as what you can fill that barrel up in. So if I want to maximize the growth and health of a particular plant, I'm going to need sunlight, I'm going to need water, I'm going to need some nutrients for the plant, I'm going to need decent soil, a whole bunch of things, right? So all of those things are each one is a barrel stave, one of those staves of a barrel, one of those slats that you see in a barrel. What Liebig's Law, the minimum, says is that the amount of energy and good growth and health that you can have in that plant is reliant on only one short barrel stave.
Right.
One short slat of that barrel. And the more limiting that one is, doesn't matter how much sunlight and water and everything else you're providing, if you don't have the proper nutrients, or maybe you put your plant in the wrong site, then that's the limiting factor, and your plant's only going to be so healthy. So what your job is to do is to manage as many of those. We can't control the sun, obviously, but we can control proper watering, we can control proper site selection, we can control proper maintenance. So manage those as best you can, and you're raising those barrel staves up to fill it up with whatever you want to put in there, water, wine, whatever flavor of booze you like, or non-alcoholic beverage. But that's how healthy that plant will be. So pull those barrel staves up as high as what you can. And in some cases, weather is going to shorten one of those barrels, and we can't do anything about that. But the higher you have the level of those other staves, that means that plant's been healthier, and it will be more resilient to those types of stresses and can handle those things much, much easier, and you'll have a very healthy garden that way.
And you maybe realize something we hadn't talked about that really will help to offset those barrel staves or those limiting factors that we can't control. If we promote a good amount of diversity in our planting site, and don't rely too heavy upon all aster or all blue star, if there's a limiting factor beyond our control that is detrimental to aster, it may be a limiting factor that helps Blue Star that season. So by increasing your diversity in your planting site, it makes it so dynamic that each year is going to be different than the other, even though everything that you've planted stays the same. Because if you can, again, address your limiting factors and try and keep those in check, whether it's water or nutrients, organic matter, and say it's a cool, wet spring, you might have a plant thrive that had been kind of laying there just doing its thing, and then the others may be tamped down that year, but it will be way better and still lend to the productivity of the site rather than all of the one plant just being stymied or maybe even dying.
Yep.
So diversity is key in these projects, not only for that, for survivability, but also because of the amount of pollinators, insects, and critters that it benefits. So diversity is really good. It's a huge part of plant health care that we hadn't talked about yet.
Yes.
Because when an outside pest does come through, say this is an example, please don't follow this example and put 50 red maples on that corner lot. Please don't do that. But if a pest such as Asian longhorn beetle, which is something that could very, this is a practical example, this could happen in the near future.
Probably will happen,
comes to the St. Louis region, it primarily targets red maple as a something that it kills. So your whole project will be wiped out in potentially one season. But if you were to have planted one or two of those tree species and a lot of other tree species, yeah, that's tough that you lost those, but your project hasn't failed. So just that's the kind of thing to keep in mind.
That's absolutely true of any plant, and plus it's more enjoyable to see the ebbs and flows that then go on a garden, and you get to appreciate different things in different years.
Yeah.
Cardinal flower will probably be going crazy this year because it likes wet weather, so you'll see a lot of pretty red flowers because they like the wet seasons. And then next year, if we're a little bit drier, you probably won't see a whole heck of a lot of them. They just won't do as well. So that's a great comment, and it's just fun to watch.
Yeah,
fun to watch. So do we have more questions? Otherwise, I think we're about winding down, aren't we?
I think so. Yeah.
I think we're good on questions. If we fail to answer any questions today, please feel free to give us a call at 314-772-4646.
Do you want to say it in here to make sure people can hear you? Okay.
Or they can email info@brightsidestl.org. And there were a couple questions that were very specific to projects.
Sure.
And we'll answer those directly.
Perfect.
With the person who asked. We had somebody comment throughout the morning. We've had several very highly complimentary comments.
Well, thank you.
What a wonderful job that you both have done in presenting this information. And I have to tell you one more time, and I'm gonna hold this up. The native plants for your landscape.
Yes.
This is just one of the Missouri publications. I'll let you hold it.
Yeah, absolutely.
This is just one of the publications that the Missouri Department of Conservation have put together over the years. Many of these publications are available right here at Brightside. Because of the coronavirus, we ask that you call us and let us know when you want to come over and pick up some material. We're happy to work with you. You can come by the demonstration garden at any time. But we've not had a better partner than the Missouri Department of Conservation. They have been so good in helping connect people in the St. Louis area with native plants and nature, and it's been a wonderful partnership. And the fact that we were able to have Danny Moncheski and Mark Grueber out here this morning is just another testament to the strong partnership that we have with the department. So thank you both for being here.
Thank you.
Thanks for all of your expertise in sharing with us this morning.
And I have to interrupt and say there's a lovely little goldfinch right on top of some emerging cone flowers in the background right here.
Oh, that's awesome.
That's the type of thing you get when you have a successful garden that you can appreciate. So, and thank you guys. Thank Brightside for helping us get our conservation message out. You guys have been a great partner for us as well. So it's a mutually beneficial relationship. We appreciate all the work you guys are doing.
And we're so excited for everyone that's been viewing this.
Yes.
To get your fingers dirty and get those plants in the ground, because as we go around town looking at the tree canopy that we look at, we always notice projects that catch our eye on street corners and things, and I can't wait to see what comes out of this year.
Yeah, it makes it fun for us.
Yeah,
so we love doing this sort of thing.
Good luck, everybody.
Good luck.
Thank you. And I will tell you one more thing. The coolest thing about this is not only do native plants attract the goldfinches and the cardinal flower attract the hummingbirds and all kinds of different nature, but throughout this morning, what you couldn't see is families are coming out to spend time in the green space, to
Absolutely.
be outside, to be connected with nature. And so it's a good partnership. It's a great space in your own community when you're developing a neighborhood gathering space. Think about that it's places where lots of people
happy and healthier.
Yeah,
they really do make us happier and healthier. So the science backs it up 100%.
Wonderful. Thank you all so much. You guys are awesome. We love working with you.
Thank you guys.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
All right.